Today, we're joined by Jaclyn Nelson, the co-founder and CEO of Tribe AI, the AI native services firm that forward deploys top engineers into the Fortune 500 to build AI products. And she's also my partner at Coalition. We're going to nerd out on all things enterprise AI, like why the bottleneck to AI transformation isn't selling, but adoption. And how early are we? Great Chat is brought to you by Mercury, radically different banking loved by over 300,000 entrepreneurs. We use Mercury to run this podcast and love recommending it to other founders and fund managers. It's free to get started. Try it for yourself. Visit mercury.com to learn more and apply online in minutes.
Shaker.
Hey guys.
Hi.
Jackie, welcome to the group chat.
I am thrilled to be here. Let's chat it up.
My group chats have like cross-pollinated because of course you're in my Coalition chat and now you're in my Great Chat. So welcome to the pod. We're thrilled to have you here. And I feel like a lot of the stuff that's happened in the last week is like very in your world. Like, I mean, what isn't AI news these days?
It's a weird moment.
I mean, SpaceX S1 maybe being like the thing that everyone has been waiting for and salivating over.
Did you do a deep dive? Or has your Claude done a deep dive?
I did ask Claude, and Claude was like, "Oh, SpaceX is going public? I don't think that's true. That would be a big moment. Let me check." And I was like, "Wait, did we just go back a year?"
No.
And then it it sort of did its search in real time, and it was like, "Well, many of these sources are speculative." Like it took a lot of cycles to get to having any like ability to summarize sort of the key points, the main reactions. So I think like upgrading, the more I pay Claude, the less value I seem to get right now. So I'm not sure what's going on.
Something I've been noticing is like if I have like an experience like that with Claude, I'll just jump to ChatGPT. Or then if somebody like, if I don't get like a good response or have like a sort of a bad interaction, I'll just jump to a different one and I just kind of rotate all day. And I'm just wondering like what that does for the long term.
It's going to be like Uber and Lyft with comparison pricing.
Totally. It's like it becomes like a little undifferentiated. Although, I mean, Claude has all of my like Great Chat memory. And so I like to sort of prompt it in there. Anyways, well, maybe SpaceX is giving Anthropic like the shitty compute and it's showing up in the product. I don't know if that's a thing, but okay, maybe like without Claude's help and with more manual research, I mean, it's an anticipated valuation of 1.75 trillion, which is insane. Starlink is like the cash engine and accounts for 61% of total revenue. And then Helen, I feel like you were most focused on the TAM.
Well, that slide was just so funny, right? It was like, this is the largest TAM of all time. And you're like, oh, okay. I saw a couple other folks have this reaction, but it's like, the thing that I was reminded of was, I think the last time Elon put together some sort of like prospectus or forecast, it was after he acquired Twitter. And it was like, here's what I'm projecting revenue to look like in the future in something like 4 years from now or something. It wasn't that too far in the future. And it was like two things. One, I think there was a 8x revenue growth, but then more than half of that would have been non-ads. You know, let's fast forward because it has been 4 years, I think, since he published something like that. And it's like, total revenue is down something like 75% or something, like something pretty significant. And it's still majority ads. So I think people are just like, well, you know, for him to follow through on what he says is kind of not just using that as a moment. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Just last time we saw a TAM slide, you know.
Early stage investors love to sort of gently make fun of TAM slides because every TAM slide is like the numbers are ridiculous and don't necessarily like it's like that you have to, as a founder, you have to have a TAM slide, but the TAM slide is often ridiculous. And like this is validating, I think, for all of those early venture-backed founders that even when you get to the scale, your TAM section is going to be ridiculous. Like it doesn't matter whether you're pre-product, pre-revenue, or you're going public with an implied $1.75 trillion valuation. The TAM section is always like, maybe the point is for it to be absurd. So, because I think it's something like 28.5 trillion, like it's like the size of the US economy, which is amazing.
You know, on the other hand, like data centers in space.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Believable. It's wild and ambitious and all the things that it should be, but like, it's not insane. I think that it's just, we're having a hard time sort of like grasping the possibility of that. But I think that like it's consistent with what I think SpaceX is trying to promise, and maybe it's possible.
It's also where we are in the market. Like we have OpenAI and Anthropic like looking to go public really soon. Everything's going to be in the trillions. Like billions are no longer interesting. Elon's never one to want to be one-upped. So I just kind of think there's a lot of jockeying.
On that point, Jackie, I do think like the best move that Elon has made is to be first. Because like how much capital is out there, and we've talked a lot about how this race is as much about like how much capital can you accumulate as anything else. And SpaceX being first to market is going to be first to tap into those capital pools. And so Elon is outmaneuvering the other players in that respect, and we'll see. And then the hilarious thing is like Anthropic is part of what makes this story so compelling, right? They signed up to spend $1.25 billion per month and rent and compute from Colossus, and so that's like $45 billion over the contract period, which is through like spring 2029. So they're actively making SpaceX's IPO sexier, which I just love it. Everything's so incestuous.
But then OpenAI filed right away, or like appears to be filing. And so I think that's the like now who's going to be next is the big question. That
feels like the more cutthroat race to me, like Anthropic versus OpenAI. Like SpaceX has a lot of other stuff in it, whereas like Anthropic and OpenAI are much more sort of peers, competitors. One's a spite company of the other. So that's the real race.
What is I've heard some responses to this, but asking you guys, like, what was the logic of sort of turduckening all of the companies inside SpaceX? Like SpaceX itself, okay, yes, incredible. And then it's like some of the others, I mean, XAI, right? Still such a long-term bet, but like a hotly contested race with OpenAI and Anthropic. And then, X, which still feels early days in what its ultimate form will be. And so, like, what was the party line on like kind of like why all those things were grouped together?
My hunch back to the like, this is all about capital and fundraising is people will always give Elon money because he makes good on their investments. And so I think a lot of the turduckening, which Helen, if you coined that, that's fantastic, is about like, people who gave him money for XAI or money for X. He's jamming these things in so that they can have a return. And you can always tell a story. Now we have a story around like data centers in space. You could always find the narrative, but I do think a lot of it is like Elon is generally a good bet. And even when the assets don't look good, like Twitter or X, to your point earlier, like those investors will probably do well in the SpaceX IPO. And so I think he really plays the long game when it comes to fundraising. That's my best.
This is the best shot at him looking like a genius. I think there's a narrative, true, not true, truth doesn't matter anymore, that this was the plan all along. That like these assets actually together are what creates this like massive vision and value, and that independently they're far less interesting. But if you actually like take the social graph, with the AI capabilities, with the compute, like that's where you get, the insane power and ambition. Again, truth being irrelevant and did narrative come after or before? But I think there's like a beautiful story here of like a really visionary person when like no one else believed or it made sense before.
Well, Jaclyn, one thing about me when I work with founders, I always say like you have to make it seem inevitable that this was the plan the whole time, and so you validating that point. But no, yeah, I think that's a good point. And you can't be a techno optimist without, frankly, rooting for everything that is wrapped in this turducken. So here we go. Let's go.
I think there are nuanced ways to be a techno optimist. Elon has always had a vision for like an everything app, right? So even back in his like PayPal days or pre-PayPal, pre that merger, like he's wanted to have like one sort of app to rule them all. And now he's like doing it more at the infra layer. And so, Jackie, to your point, like it does actually feel like part of a grand master plan. And the pieces have just come together in ways maybe none of us could have imagined a decade ago, certainly 2 decades ago. I'm surprised he hasn't jammed Tesla in yet, but maybe that will be like a post.
Sure, he tried.
IPO.
Yeah.
Peter Thiel has the famous quote, we were promised flying cars and we got 140 characters. And my like secret theory has been like Elon is just building a company or an empire based on that tweet, right? Like we're sending Teslas to space and we have the 100, like you can have it all. It's not an either or. So
see, genius.
Against this backdrop, Google I/O felt a little like meh. I don't know. I'm not deep enough in the sort of Google universe to assess personally, but it felt, I don't know, it felt very measured. It felt a little bit more incremental. Part of this was I listened to the Hard Fork interview with Sundar, and Sundar is just like, he's the opposite of Elon, right? Like he's so thoughtful and calm and not hyperbolic in any way, and acknowledges like where they're behind or where like, and so I maybe it's just that I hadn't recalibrated to like a CEO who's telling it like it is versus one who's
to nuance,
painting an insane picture. Yeah. Too nuanced. But yeah, in the midst of all of this AI craziness, Google I/O kind of felt like business as usual, but not like a giant leap forward in the way that Gemini 3 was.
How much of this do you think is kind of like the iPhone effect, where like we've reached diminishing returns on like what these models can do? And iPhone effect meaning like every time like Apple does a keynote and talks about stuff in the new iPhone, I'm like, I'm good. I was good with that camera 4 generations ago. Totally. Like I don't need to see like the hairs inside my kids' nostrils. Like I'm so good. And so now I think we're like, holy crap, AI is incredible, but it's like everything's going to feel really incremental, like to what you said.
I don't buy that.
No.
Okay. I think there are going to be step function improvements from here. I was expecting a big week, and I was like, I was ready. And this is from someone who I'm pretty against conference-driven development. I think we get like, the like forcing function of releases, but I think we actually just get way worse products as an industry. Like I really think it like works against all of us, but it exists. So there we are. But I did think that this was kind of like a moment where Google could have really created a lot of noise, like, and really assumed a position. And part of my theory, and I will admit, I recently launched a partnership with Google. I am ex-Google, so like I am closely monitoring things, and certainly not unbiased here. But if you really believe that new center of gravity is going to happen with AI integrating directly into Google Docs and email and sort of PowerPoint and all kinds of the Google Slides, whatever, it makes sense to me that Google would step up and say like, you're not eating my lunch. Like we're going to do this too, and we're going to do it better. And I just don't think they leaned into that at all. I think it wasn't actually the lack of like step function improvements for me. I think it was like the lack of clarity and the lack of like, here's what you do with us and here's how to use our tools. It almost feels like we went back to, the GPT versions of models where there were all of these, fragmented models and different names and no one could keep track of what to use for what. Like, I think they just kind of like lost. They had an opportunity and they didn't fully capture it.
So like a story problem more than anything.
And your naming point resonates, but also reminds me of like my one sort of like fun takeaway from the I/O announcements was that they're sort of like sunsetting the Gemini brand, right? And like I sort of felt like they were laying the groundwork for Google to sort of like take this 2.0 meaning, which is like the future of search being inside of a chat versus, the browser as it is today. And I have this fun, sort of long Google theory on how they could win the AI race, which is like helping advertisers sort of make that transition, so that they continue to dominate basically search. But in order to do that, as a public company, it's going to be very difficult because there's going to be a transition period. So like I always have this like weird hot take that like they should take themselves private, and the whole Alphabet setup was like designed for this exact scenario in mind. So like Wall Street doesn't freak out when they transition and like there's a little bit of a dip. So I saw like the sort of maybe the quiet sort of sunsetting, or like maybe de-emphasis on Gemini is like, oh, maybe this could happen. But that was kind of like my takeaway. So like for like that to be one of the takeaways, Ashley, for to your point, like not like blockbuster announcements.
I got two things from the headlines. One was Google continues to sort of like chip away at its cash cow, which is like traditional search. And I think Google I/O sort of provided an opportunity for a lot of publishers and content creators to come out of the woodwork and talk about all of the diminishing returns they're seeing from search. And so it just sort of fed that narrative. And then also their sort of biggest story on the model side seemed to be like, we're faster and cheaper. We're that alternative. And actually, to the iPhone point, in a different way, it's like, it's sort of like the Android story, like not as sexy, but actually like much better for mass adoption, much more accessible to people. And if they had leaned into that, if they had been like, listen, sure, they're going to be these like frontier labs over here, pushing like, a Claude, launching Mythos and moving everything forward. But like, we're going to be AI for the masses unabashedly. And we're going to make that affordable, not just for individuals, but also for businesses, small businesses, large businesses, whatever. And over time, this all becomes like a little bit commoditized, and we're actually the ones that can play a volume game. Like that could have been an interesting story for them. But maybe that's a hard story to tell if you want to get the top talent or retain the top talent in this like very sexy, we're addicted to step function improvements time.
I think you can also argue that they actually leaned into, to your point, a consumer story, not an enterprise story. And so what I was expecting them to do is to lean in on enterprise, because that's so clearly where OpenAI and Anthropic are like encroaching on their biz. But I think actually it makes so much sense that they, their biggest step function improvement was in a video generation model, which is very much geared at consumers and geared at kind of creatives. And I think, then you're betting that people keep building on the Google suite and ecosystem, that then you can sort of tackle the enterprise use cases sort of in a sort of secondary way. And so I think, Ash, that kind of goes to your point on like, hey, we're going to go for like the mass strategy. And I actually think that's really where OpenAI started. But since Anthropic moved the war to enterprise, to B2B, they then shifted focus. And then maybe Google says like, hey, I see an opening and I'm going to take it and like go gain a ton of share, be the Kleenex, again, be the Google Helen, right? Google search, and then kind of come back to enterprise because we have so much surface area.
I love that. I just want that narrative. I want something like crisp
a little
that
more,
makes it all sound strategic versus sort of like here's a grab bag of things that we've collected.
And that almost goes back to the conference-driven development, which is, hey, you're throwing what actually happens inside these companies. You're kind of throwing a lot of spaghetti at the wall and then seeing what makes the cut for the announcements. And I think what makes the cut are like, hey, what actually like put up the best results? What's going to tell the best story? And I think in some cases, like, and I'm not talking about Google, I'm talking about any large tech companies with conference-driven development, you don't really know until kind of the end. And so I actually think you almost like, you miss the chance for some of that narrative if you were actually doing that bottoms-up development.
Right, like you're like stitching it together towards the home stretch. Jackie, I kind of love that as a point because I think I'm thinking back to my like enterprise software days. And we used our annual conference, Boxworks, as like a forcing function to get everyone excited to be ready to like ship, whether it was something in GA or the beta of something. You have your customers' attention. Once a year, you have a stage and you should take advantage of it. And I think the news cycles and the development cycles in this moment are so much faster that like maybe the old conference model makes far less sense for like this kind of approach to product launches, because you can get if you're a Google or an Anthropic or an OpenAI, you can have anyone's attention on any Tuesday or any Thursday, and
That's
you can
how I
make a
feel.
moment and like give people things that like they can play with. And like it's actually like it used to be you needed to package a lot of stuff together to create a story. And now actually it's a little bit overwhelming and dilutes the story. And so, yeah, maybe the whole sort of conference model, unless maybe it still makes sense for an Apple where you have some like big hardware moments or something like that. But for a Google, and maybe for an OpenAI, like their next dev day, like I remember, Helen, were you at the last one, or maybe we were just following along? It was like a barrage of things.
Developer Day to me, and I've said this a couple times, it almost felt like a fire hose intentionally, because that was sort of like peak VC brain of like, well, I don't know if I want to invest in any of these companies because OpenAI, we don't know what OpenAI has been up to, right? And so they basically took the stage and said like, hi everyone, don't bother because we're going to do all of these. And it was very smart. I thought it was the right thing, but I think that's kind of...
Yeah, come join us instead. You know, best talent, don't start a company, don't bother, just like come work here.
Right, and it was good.
Right, you have a room full of developers, like, yeah, that probably really worked.
I love it. Different seasons of AI, and they are like passing so quickly. So I think like a recurring theme on this podcast is like, where are we actually in AI adoption? You see these insane stories around valuations and fundraising and ARR that are just like, you know, record breaking, mind breaking. But the adoption side of things is like a little bit more of a question mark. And institutional lag is something we talk about a lot. Like, you know, you go on Twitter and people have their crazy open claw setups and maybe are experiencing LLM psychosis, but like what's it like in the rest of the world? And so I think we can talk about that broadly, like where are we in AI adoption, especially in the enterprise world where you play. But then also you run Tribe, which is an AI native services business, and services are kind of hot right now. Like in the past couple weeks, like OpenAI and Anthropic have both launched deployment companies. And it's becoming clear that like services might be the real bottleneck for this AI transformation, not the technology itself, not can they get people and enterprises to buy it. And so we thought it would be fun to bring you here to chat about this and give us the lay of the land. Maybe just to start with the headlines that are kind of fresh, like walk us through what are these deployment companies and why did OpenAI and Anthropic feel that they needed to launch them?
Yeah, it's such a fascinating moment. And it's really these two companies, OpenAI and Anthropic, admitting that their technology is amazing, but not enough to solve the bottlenecks that enterprises face. And that those bottlenecks are so significant that not only do they have to hire tons of people at each of their companies, including forward deployed engineers, but they actually need separate standalone companies to go tackle the diffusion through parts of the economy. And in this case, they've teamed up. So OpenAI built DeployCo. They did it with a handful of private equity firms. Anthropic did the same. The structures are a bit different, but really what matters is these are standalone entities that are going to be run as separate companies. They're going to have deep connectivity and connection back to the model provider. The incentive for the model provider is diffusion of their models across a ton of companies. And the built-in distribution is really through the private equity firms. So in both cases, the partners of the private equity firms have two challenges. One, they've probably been investing in a bunch of software businesses that may not actually look like the economic model that they had projected. So already they are having a challenge in their book of business. Private equity is traditionally built to have zero zeros. So venture meant to have a lot of zeros and, some outliers. Private equity, your vol is just a much tighter band. And it's really built upon like these strong fundamental businesses that have some upside and where they have a playbook they can go run to go get that upside at scale. One, that changes like their book of business. So services becomes a really interesting opportunity for them. Two, they have a acute pain and need, which is that they have portfolio companies they have invested in that they will not be able to sell unless they are AI enabled. And so they have to actually implement AI into these companies in ways that actually create real economic value. And so how are they going to do that at scale across their portfolio companies? It's the same way they've done things across like cloud migrations. When I had started Tribe and I went to some of the private equity firms that are engaged in these deals, their big playbook on like, how to actually like get the returns projected on the operating or value creation side, it was go put these companies on the cloud, go put in some basic business intelligence, and like we can move the needle just enough. That's going to be the playbook here. And what OpenAI and Anthropic see is like, hey, built-in distribution, I can go get my tech into these companies. If we don't do it, they're going to go do it with someone else. And also, you get more service providers who are trained in actually deploying your technology and can feed more of the market. And that TAM, that problem set, is so huge. It's something they can't handle on their own. And it's something that, frankly, the services ecosystem isn't prepared to handle because you have the, big consultancies that aren't AI native. And you have, some smaller ones like Tribe, who are very AI native, but aren't yet at scale. And so they are actively trying to build up this ecosystem while also building their own solutions to these problems as well.
But isn't this like a playbook we've seen before? Because like, I feel like cloud migration had something really similar too, right? Like all of the cloud providers had these huge services arms where we didn't call them forward deployed engineers then,
Completely.
but this is not something completely novel. And to your point about breaking them out as completely separate entities, I read that cynically as like, oh, well, the economics behind like, per employee revenue are much different in a services business than something that's, exponential the way the model companies are.
I think you nailed that. They're like, we can hire more people. We can do it like funded by someone else.
Keep the math clean,
and we
right?
keep the math clean for when we go public. 100%.
Yes.
How did we get to this point where services became such a bottleneck, right? Because if like Jackie, I'll just talk you up for a moment. You've been building Tribe since 2019, 2018. Like you were building the like AI lab for enterprises before we were even using AI. We were still saying like as the term we were saying machine learning and well before generative AI. And so I think you like saw the writing on the wall that every enterprise company needed to become an AI company. But they wouldn't have the talent in-house to do that. And so there needed to be some way to like guide them through this transition, build AI-enabled products, et cetera. It's not like this is a brand new realization or idea. Is this technology hubris? Is this like, Silicon Valley is so tech will solve all problems. We don't need people to solve problems. These models are going to get so good that like it's offensive that we would even need like a services component. Is that it?
It's part hubris for sure. And I think the other part of the equation is I think they thought they could do this through the large consultancies. They've spent the last few years partnering. If you go look at the announcements from OpenAI and from others over the last, 2 years, they were all with the big firms.
But I think that now they can't risk them, like recommending a different model company. And so we're in this era of OpenAI buys TBPN, like Andreessen Horowitz launches MTS. Like you need to have your own loyal distribution network. And I think that we're also seeing that play out here because partnering with a consulting firm, I don't think that they can sign exclusivity that they're only going to be, recommending like the solutions from that provider.
They can actually. There are
they can? Okay.
There are some like native services firms that are actually signing exclusivity. Those are small guys though.
But not the big ones.
I actually don't think the risk is as much like, oh, you could go recommend my competitor. It's that frankly, it wasn't working and enterprises weren't getting results and they weren't getting them fast enough. And so like you're actually not solving a problem. And then let's also say the unsaid thing, which is that the big consultancies are the large customers of this technology themselves. There is actually a really complicated relationship across these players. But there is a tremendous gap in the market that is currently being unaddressed. And OpenAI and Anthropic got to a point, Ash, to your point, that without greater assistance, the diffusion just will not happen at the scale that is required.
And like revenue is always a lagging indicator. Like we wouldn't know for a while that like things were not going well if all we paid attention to is ARR. And yeah, it seems like the bigger players finally saw that writing on the wall. I do think it's interesting to the point around exclusivity. I imagine that like DeployCo is not going to be like multimodal, and that does not seem very customer centric to me. And Jackie, like I feel like that puts companies like Tribe in a really unique position where you can do what is best for customers in terms of what they need. And like my view, unsophisticated view of this market is like the technology is so dynamic. What might be the right model for a certain use case, like in May, by September could be something else. And so it'll be really interesting to see how these like deployment companies grapple with like customer needs versus like their real customer is kind of the lab versus the adopting enterprise, and how do they reconcile those two parties?
Yeah, I think you're really getting at two things. The first is like, going back to the hubris point of like the belief that this time would be different. Because Helen, you're right, there have been other models that we could follow. But what actually is different, and this part isn't hubris, is the speed and existential risk that creates the urgency of this market. And I think with past paradigms, we actually had time for two things to happen. One is for like more experts to be skilled. And the second is for like a services ecosystem to kind of naturally come online. Right? You could sort of train folks on a new technology. Right now, one, the technology is not hitting any stabilization point anytime soon. So it assumes that like, hey, there's a thing you learn once and then you implement at scale. That is not the case. So the DNA actually of these providers needs to change to be very iterative, agile, which if you have, hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of people, like that's just really hard to do. You can't build that DNA with that large of a footprint and with people who were built for very different paradigms. And then I think the second is just the tech is moving really fast and it's really disorienting for companies. And so I see our advantages is two things. One is like absolutely that we get to be customer first. We get to play the role of Switzerland. We are power adopters of all of these technologies and we partner kind of across the ecosystem.
You are really just, right at the front line of watching enterprises adopt AI. And just based on what you think current sentiment is, like when you read the news or you're on Twitter or, you're here overhearing conversations, do you feel like we're generally underestimating or overestimating how quickly transformation will happen in the enterprise? Because so it's like two things I'm reminded of. One, my mom works for a Fortune 50 company, and there's still a title Chief Digital Transformation Officer that was created 20-something years ago, right? For a lot of these, companies and legacy industry, like big, again, Fortune 50 company, it just takes a lot longer than you might expect. And technology holds on a lot longer than you expect. I mean, she was recently telling me she's like looking for people who understand mainframe because like there are parts of the stack that still exist there. I mean, it's crazy stuff. But so like, where do you see this, I guess, relative to past waves of digital transformation or migration to cloud or things like that?
I think two things are true. One, I believe the technology is very real, very profound. And I think that actually there really is an exciting case for why a incumbent player can actually win in this world and actually create tremendous value. Two, it's really friggin' hard. And if it were easy, we would have success stories. We would have case studies. We have none. And so I'm seeing, just as revenue is that lagging indicator, I am seeing all of the forward-looking indicators of like, hey, there's really real, really powerful stuff. You brought up mainframes. I'm hearing companies that are actually going after and using AI to actually like reduce the load on mainframes. And so like there are really interesting ways you can think about like, hey, these companies are changing. They're changing faster than they've ever changed before. And the urgency is there, not for everyone, but for many. But it's still going to be a slog. And that is the services opportunity.
What are the parts that we tend to underestimate, like sitting in Silicon Valley and in startups? Like, obviously, I think a lot of people think, oh, if adoption is slow, it's the tech, and the tech will fix that. And I think we've like talked about why that isn't the case. But when you're thinking about like how services helps fill this gap, are the hardest parts figuring out how to build with AI, or is it more like organizational or like rethinking the company's strategy or pricing? Because I feel like there are a lot of sort of second order impacts of like going AI native or, AI first that maybe when you're at a small VC firm or like a venture backed startup, like you just don't even have those issues to worry about. Like, what are the things that are like harder than people expect when you're taking a Fortune 500 or Fortune 100 company and helping them think through how can you be the incumbent that actually wins in this moment?
I'll give you two examples. So the first is think about code migration, right? This is like a huge use case, killer use case for Anthropic, now for OpenAI as well. So what does that mean? You have code written in COBOL. That's like most financial institutions. And you can go migrate it to a more modern coding language. Fantastic. That completely works if the way it has been built and the process actually is one that you just can migrate one to the other. There is no enterprise in which that is the case. Mm-hmm. And so even taking that use case, you have to actually go rethink how you're doing everything. And then it is no longer a code migration use case. You're talking about a complete process redesign and then actually changing the sort of underlying technology around that newer solution. The word I kind of come back to is like refactoring. You really need to like be sort of thinking about things from first principles. And so in addition to like the lack of deep technical understanding of of AI, you also just don't have people who are sort of typically first principles thinkers or 0 to 1 thinkers. And so I actually think that that's probably one area that's sort of under discussed, is that actually like it's that DNA difference. It's not just the sort of technical gap. It's also that like what is required today takes a very different mindset than many have, which is kind of like, hey, we've always done it this way. So we can do it that way in another language. That doesn't work. It won't get them really very far. It won't get any results.
I'm seeing people be surprised on how much soft skills play a role here and helping people through this transition or migration, whatever you want to call it. But I don't think that this can happen. This revolution can happen without people. And I think that this beautiful exercise of like bringing people along has been like never been more valuable than before. And so we're about to learn like what happens when companies properly invest in change management, right? All these like soft things that we've been sort of poo-pooing in this like hard era of founder mode and sort of brute force and like tech will lead the way, tech solves all problems. And yet, we're uncovering like the limitations to just the UX or just the sort of intuitiveness, overall with a lot of these tools, particularly in enterprises where you've got systems and playbooks and sort of like operations that have been developed and refined, in some cases over decades. So like, I think that watching this must be fascinating on the front lines, but also like playing a role in shaping it. I mean, tell me about the skills that you've seen, or like what you predict in terms of like what are the most valuable skills that you're seeing emerge in helping this sort of like enterprise transformation.
Yeah, I think like every leader today needs to be more like a founder. And so I think there's a real shift. Like you sort of talked about soft skills. Like we talk about founders as very technical, but also they're leading teams. They're like building, and they're building together and like very mission aligned. And I actually think that like there's so much that goes beyond technical that we actually look to in our tech leaders, that I think now we need to see in our sort of corporate America leaders and leadership teams. The thing that I find like really changes folks' understanding is really like it's curiosity. It's like how much do you want to play with and like feel bad at these things, and like how high is your tolerance for pain. It's like all of these very founder traits, right? Like I'm a masochist, right? It's like that's kind of like, that's very normal in tech. And it's actually not very normal in places that have actually like built a lot of comfort into the way they operate. And so I think there's a real shift there. And then maybe the last thing I'll leave you with is I actually think change management is such a misnomer here. I think what I hear from a lot of companies is like, it's 1/3 technical and 2/3 change management. I think it's bullshit. I mean, the example that I just gave you, that's not change management. That's actually like going and solving a really interesting technical problem in a new way. And like, I think we're combining so much stuff together. And actually that's creating some of the confusion.
Okay, so if it's not change management, is it just like pure embracing of innovation? Like, is it mindset? Like what, I mean, not to box you in on those variables alone, but like, what do you think it is?
I think it's like, you have to actually go rebuild everything in your company.
Yeah, change management is like kind of a reactive thing,
exactly.
right? Like it's like that's what like comms often is like brought in, like, oh, we need to like do a bunch of layoffs and do these org change and now put a story around this, make people feel good about this thing that has to happen. And it's like the question of what needs to happen is like something you have to like jump in and like get messy to figure out. And so change management just feels like a sequential thing. Yeah.
It assumes some kind of stasis to me. Like there has been a change and now we we manage it, right? We absorb it. It is like comfort with constant change.
Yeah, but these layoffs now, looking at it through that lens, actually makes more sense because in many ways it could be easier to sort of like start fresh. If that's what you're saying, like the transition is just...
I have written about exactly this. I just think it's one...
And that's unfortunate, of course, like on an individual level for people who are impacted. But I think looking at it from, tops down and looking forward, like perhaps this is just sort of like you have to, cut it somewhere and just restart.
Everyone also has to do this on an individual level, right? Like there's like the company level of like, get your hands dirty, get curious, like have high tolerance for pain, figure out where you're going. And then I think there's such a sort of negative myth around like young people are so screwed. And my personal belief is like young people are actually going to figure this out much faster than a lot of mid-career professionals. And I think that's like the only way out is through. And there is no like, okay, you've done the work and now you're at the other side. Like there's like reinvention that has to happen or rebuilding, Jackie, to use your term, at the company level and the personal level. And that's hard, but like hopefully we can get excited about that and get other people excited about that, because I think we've generally done a terrible job as an industry preparing people and businesses for what's ahead. But if they work with Tribe, they're ready. They know what they're doing.
Game on.
All right, Jackie.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for joining.
Guys, you're the best. This was so much fun. Made my day.
Yay.
Thank you for listening to Great Chat. Have questions for us? Submit them on anothergreatchat.com. See you next week.